Hello and welcome to Bottom Line. The problem of India's healthcare can be said in many ways. One way, as this gentleman next to me is going to put it, is either you do something about someone or leave them to die. Well, I'm joined by Dr. Prathap Reddy, founder of the Apollo Group, who tends to view things in very stark ways, and perhaps that's the reason you can find solutions for a problem as severe as a healthcare gap that we have in India. Dr. Reddy, let me start with a larger question, and I'm going to ask you about two or three things. I think one is, we continue to grapple with fundamental healthcare challenges in India, whether it's lack of doctors or lack of beds or lack of patient care, primary health centers. It's huge. So who fixes this problem is really my second question, right? I mean, is it the government? Is it private sector? And finally, we'll talk a little bit about Apollo's role in this and what is it that you can do or will continue to do that can bridge the gap to some extent. So let's come back to the larger problem that this country is facing.
Can I state something before the health?
Please.
And many people don't know what we have in our creation. If you ask me what's the cost of your body, majority of the people say it's priceless.
Yeah.
But there is a price to it. Previously, 10 years ago, the study from Nashville, they said it cost $6 trillion.
Okay.
6 weeks ago, there was a study from Yale. Yale said our parts, the brain, the heart, and the bones, and all of these, by parts it costs a few $1 million, but a functional body costs $6,000 trillion.
Wow.
So that is that expense of creation that we have. So when we talk about health, I think we must all realize that we care so much for our vehicles, so much for our home, the beauty of it and the maintenance of it, but very few people ever think that here is a wonderful creation and then we need to pay some attention to it. So I think that's the first that need to be done before the government, the doctor,
take care of yourself rather than expect the government or the private sector to do it.
I want people to want their health.
Right. So how bad is the problem today? I mean the numbers are all there, right? I mean, we've got, India has only 9 beds per 1,000. Our expenditure on healthcare as a percentage of GDP is barely 1%. Most countries that we would like to compare ourselves with are much higher. So how bad is the problem to the extent that we are even able to recognize it?
What we are spending on health is about 0.9%, but this year our budget has increased another 33,000 crores. So it takes to about 1.5 million. If you look at the other just BRIC countries, Brazil spends about 9%.
Right.
South Africa spends about 6.5%. China spends close to 4%. So I think what's needed is, I think the expense on health compared to our GDP percentage must increase, number one. Second thing I see, we must now find a way saying there are 3 partners to this. First is the people, then we have the providers and the government.
Right.
How does these 3 work together? For that, I think we need to understand the basic problem of the status of the health and how we should address the various issues.
So as things stand today, can it be said that the government has really been unable to deliver healthcare, whereas the private sector willy-nilly has landed up with the task and the job of delivering healthcare?
I think for a long time, private healthcare existed to the extent of 60-70% of the healthcare was handled by the private. But the difference was, if you look at 3 decades ago, 4 decades ago, the government did the primary, secondary and tertiary care, whereas the private healthcare did only the primary care and to some extent secondary care. Now the thing has changed. Today the majority of the tertiary care is being handled by the private healthcare players, whereas the primary healthcare and the secondary healthcare is shared both by the government.
So when you say tertiary healthcare, could you define it for our viewers?
I think when we started, heart surgeries was tertiary care. But today when we mean by tertiary care, we talk about major surgeries, like neurosurgeries, major oncological surgeries, and more importantly the transplants. When we talk about the renal transplant, heart transplant, liver transplant, all other organ transplants. So these primarily we are classified as quaternary care. That very few hospitals in the country are doing, because that needs just not the skills, but needs a tremendous amount of infrastructure and of course most importantly the discipline. this has now fallen more or less on the private sector side to do the quaternary care,
Right.
whereas the governments are doing. But I must give credit, when I'm talking about government hospitals, the All India Institute-like hospitals are different. They are doing extraordinary work. They do tertiary care, they do quaternary care,
So you mean the
AIIMS-like institutions.
Yeah.
There are 3, 4. The government is planning to establish other 6, 7. But all of these do extraordinary work. So I think they belong to this club of doing advanced healthcare.
But let me ask you one quick question on AIIMS. I think the Vajpayee government in 2004 said that they wanted to set up 8 more AIIMS, and it I think is running about 6 or 7 years behind schedule, if not longer, because some have come up, yet not fully ready. Do we have the doctors in this country, the trained doctors, to actually staff all these institutes of health?
I think that's a good question, Sandil. See, one of those who strongly believe that Indian doctors' skills are par excellent. Previously, we used to say Indian doctor overseas is excellent. But now we have demonstrated that here. Take any of these. Whether if you take heart surgeries, our success rate is over 99%. So I think what it requires is the Indian doctor to be trained to that level and to be supported with the infrastructure and a team. This is where I think All India Institutes, when they do come, is going to be a great asset, because they're not really going to train people for themselves, but there are a number of doctors from them who are trained could be gainfully employed.
But we still have a fundamental supply-demand mismatch when it comes to doctors, right? When you say, doctors available for access.
It's not fundamental. We are supposed to be having 700,000 doctors according to MCI.
Yeah.
According to me, there are hardly 500,000 doctors who are practicing. And there are about 300,000-400,000 doctors who are outside the country. But what we need is to double these doctors.
So how
At
do
least we need put more medical colleges.
And who's going to run the medical colleges?
Again, there is a concept saying, why should private run the hospitals? If they don't run, the government is not able to establish all this government medical colleges. Ideally, if they run, it's wonderful, because then there won't be this blame that these guys are making money in medicine, in education too. But basically, if you look at the rapidity with which the private sector is able to develop medical colleges, is commendable. If the government does it, there is a good scope of government doing it. According to us, they have 300-400 wonderful district hospitals, and this could automatically, they can turn into medical institutions. But to turn into medical institutions, yes, they need funds to develop the infrastructure of the medical college. But most importantly, they need teachers. According to me, even the teachers, I believe, you should be able to do virtual teaching. If they do, this gross disparity that we have, that we don't have adequate teachers to run more medical colleges, can be obviated.
So the problems of healthcare, if we were to go down the chain, the supply chain or the pipeline, would begin with doctors, and as you say, it would begin with colleges or the lack of them. It would begin with the teachers to place in those colleges to teach or train those doctors, who will then come out, and hopefully they will not all go abroad, or most of them will not go abroad and stay here. So in some ways, this is sounding like it will never happen.
You raise the point saying some of them will go abroad. Not some of them. A large number of them go abroad. 3,000 doctors go abroad. Unfortunately, if there are some doctors who want to come back to India, we have an archaic rule, saying that Indians can practice anywhere in the world. We don't allow a Bangladeshi doctor, a Singapore doctor, or a US doctor to come if he is not an Indian origin.
So the supply side, as far when it comes to doctors, you feel we could fix by allowing foreigners to come and practice?
To some extent, you will get a small number.
Indians who are coming
if 3,000 doctors are going out, at least you can get 300 doctors, but who will be par excellent and clinical. They will also be useful in research and education. So I think what is needed is, we need first to develop or double the number of medical colleges that we have, because we need to take the number of doctors from 700,000 to 1.5 million doctors. Similarly, the nurses. We have about 0.8 million nurses, but we need 2.5 million. We need to triple the number of nurses. But more important is the Paramedics. We have 2.5 million paramedics. We need to take that to 10 million.
So between the people supply chain of nurses, paramedics, doctors, and including specialists and so on in doctors, and the infrastructure, which is a more dire problem today, as something that India should be looking at very, very seriously.
I think fortunately, thanks to the earlier government, especially when Mrs. Gandhi, I told her, medical equipment was taxed as a luxury item, 340%. In less than 1 week, that was changed. So the medical equipment was zero duty. And the present Prime Minister, when he was Health Minister, made the duty as rationalized the duty from 0 to 30%. So I think we are able to get technology. So we can build the infrastructure necessary, but we need to build the people to build this, along with great processes and discipline. Because in everything else, if you commit slight mistake, it's probably a rejection. 1% rejection in industry is probably acceptable. But here rejection in a hospital is death. So I think we need to bring that level of what we call care processes.
Right. So we'll take a break here, but I'll come back and ask you really the role of the private sector in facing this and then resolving some of the healthcare issues we face, and whether the private sector is up to it, or is the private sector too profit oriented to address some of these issues. But we'll do that after break. Stay with us. You're watching Bottom Line. Welcome back. You're watching Bottom Line. I'm in conversation with Dr. Prathap Reddy, founder of the Apollo Group of Hospitals. Dr. Reddy, before we went into the break, I think we've defined the supply side of the problem. We've said that there is a people shortage, there are nurse shortages, there are doctor shortages, paramedic shortages, and we need to address that.
Yeah.
The infrastructure in
It's happening.
It's happening. And the infrastructure, in your opinion, is something that is even more manageable because we can import technology. There are entrepreneurs who build hospitals like yourself and so on. Now let's address a fundamental issue. Most people in this country at the end of the day do not get the medical care they want. In many cases, when they get the medical care, it actually renders them, it turns them into poor people. The cost of medical care itself, it sort of blows their savings away almost permanently. So who can fix this problem, or rather who will fix this problem at a very basic level?
I think there's a lot of discussions, lot of dialogues have taken place. The government has been talking about private-public partnership. But I think the private-public partnership is not enough in health. We need 3 Ps. First, it must be focused on people, then public, private. So each has got a different role. The public must know that they must be able to look after their health and ask for help whenever is necessary. Then the private sector, who is now playing a major role in 60-70% of the care is being given, they must be able to function. And when we say it's function, they must be able to function to be able to deliver excellence in the care in whatever they're doing. Plus, I call it a business. The moment I call it a business, your medicine, what is business? I said, I need something to sustain and then grow. So I think whenever we make the public-private partnership, we are forgetting the basic fact that here we need a hospital to continue to be able to give good care, and then for it we must be able to see what is sustainable and how it can grow, because there is a clear gap between the demand-supply gap in our country. We need to add 100,000 beds per day for next 15 years at a cost of nearly $60 billion. I have never seen one statement by anybody.
Right. So private sector is playing a role. Up to 60% of spends are incurred by the private sector. But that doesn't mean the problem is getting solved. That's one. Secondly, is the private sector in a position to solve the real problems of, let's say, the bottom half of India's population? A hospital like this, like Apollo, is great, but most people may not be even able to enter its portals.
I think this is why way back in 1986, when I represented to the Prime Minister then, I said we need 2 things. First, we need hospitals to be funded like any other trade or industry. And the way I addressed it is, I wish I had done a BD factory or a beer factory instead of a healthcare project. If health has to come along with your vision for 21st century, we need 3 things. First is, hospitals should be funded like any other trade or industry. Second thing I said, a person when he falls ill, it's not him. It is his wife or his relative or friend who has to take him to the best medical facility and see how it's paid for. To avoid that, as I said, we need to encourage insurance or health plans. So I think the answer lies in these two. It's
but
not
the insurance is there. I mean, today we have an insurance. You have a presence in insurance, but it's very small.
But it's still very small. What's needed is for it to grow. At that time we allowed 10,000 rupees to be exempt from tax. After 30 years, after 25 years, the amount is only 15,000, although the inflation has been steeply gone up.
Right. So the larger question I was asking you, this is not about whether you should make profit or not. The larger question is, can the private sector be trusted upon, not that one mistrusts them, but can they be trusted to fix the larger problem, which is the bottom half, right? The top half, I think, will take care of itself, or the top 20% will take care of itself. From your answer, it appears like that it perhaps cannot, right?
It can't fix for all the 50%.
Right.
There is no way I can give 50% of the hospital beds free, because who pays for it? Even now what we have three categories of patients: a shared bed where the patient's cost is subsidized or given totally free. We have an independent room where he pays for and pays a little more. But we have the other category of patient who cross-subsidizes me, so that I sustain first to be able to do. And not only sustain, you need to continuously invest on technology.
Right. So if that is indeed the case, how will the government then step in? The problem with the government to some extent is, or maybe a large extent is, that the intentions may be good, the budgets may be strong. I mean, the allocations, while it continues to be under 1% of GDP, have been rising continuously in the last 5 years. We are over 30,000 crore now, pure government expenditure, central. Now, but the problem is that the delivery of this is flawed, or it's getting lost in scams. We've seen a lot of big scams in the National Rural Health Mission, for instance. So at the end of the day, it's the citizen of this country who is suffering, unable to access primary care, secondary care, or even tertiary care, as you say. So just if I were to circle back from where we started.
I think the government is completely aware, because the questions and answers already are there.
Yeah.
That there is a large number of people who cannot afford, especially the secondary and tertiary care, but by trying to provide them 10,000 rupees or 20,000 rupees coverage for primary care is really not the burden. You said no, that some of them are becoming poor.
Yeah.
And that is because of the tertiary care. Because if they have to shell out 1 lakh of rupees, naturally they don't have that 1 lakh of rupees. For example, they did a great work in National Rural Health Mission. Leave alone the shortcomings in it, I think it's a great idea. Now they brought the urban rural mission into this, so that is going to take care of a lot of people in that category. I think that stress there is going to be on the prevention, early detection, and then if it's needed, what need to be done. So the government hospitals, to some extent, I think, like in US and everywhere, they should have a contract with the private hospital saying, hey, your cost is 100 rupees, I'll pay you 100 plus 9. 109 rupees I'll pay. I think that's the way we can together sit down. This is why I typically say top-down approach will not solve it. Only bottom-up. That is, we know what the problems are. How do we get to solve these problems, and together how do we work in this is the real answer. And I have a great hope that this will happen.
So if I were to circle back, I mean, as we conclude now, how much of this do you think, I mean, when I say how much, I mean really how many of the problems that we've talked about at the very beginning of the supply pipeline and right up till the end of the pipeline, which is high-end tertiary care, which also poor people need, or everyone needs, can we solve in the foreseeable future? And what are the most critical steps that we need to take right now in order to address them?
I think the most critical step is giving the responsibility for the individual to look after himself, number one. In which case, he will not fall into tertiary care facility. What we are talking about is, even the Minister of Health has addressed this issue, that he would like to do preliminary check for 100 million cardiac, cancer, diabetic screening. It will be a great thing. Once this is done, then he will know that he has this problem, and then he will listen to what we say. Reduce salt, do a little bit of exercise. As I told you, that 5 things in billion hearts beating.
Yeah.
If they do that, our national health indices will markedly increase. Then we can see the number of people who need treatment will come down drastically.
And you feel that that's been the cause of so many of the problems in healthcare delivery in India, a top-down approach?
100%. I think, we are all very intelligent, and Indian healthcare has demonstrated that skills that we are second to none in almost in everything else. And if we are not able to keep our people's health, I think there's some amount of lack of working together.
Right.
Not the intention, I'm sure. Our ministers or the planning commission, everybody has got the same intention, because with all these meetings they had is to see how to improve the level of healthcare in our country. What is required, I think, is to relook at it from this angle and see how do we juxtaposition all.
Right.
All means not just the private, government and the private, including the individual.
So last question, Dr. Reddy, what is your own health regime? How do you take care of your health, and how do you ensure that you don't visit your own hospital, not the office but the hospital frequently?
I think it's very clear, justifiably you can say I'm a doctor, so I understand what it is. I know how to keep diabetes disease free.
When did you last practice?
Many years ago. Even now I miss that. Okay. That's the only thing I miss is not examining a patient and writing a prescription. But I still go with my strength and stop with at least 10-15 patients a day and speak to at least 100 patients and patient relatives.
Right. Dr. Reddy, thank you so much for speaking.
Thank you very much, Brian. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, that's all we have time on this edition of Bottom Line. Thanks for watching.